Thanks a ton, Vijay. Thanks for joining us here at the Enterprise Innovation Summit and speaking to us on automation. Now, we'll stay with this line of thought as we head to our next innovation showcase on how AI can be a pivot to accelerate intelligent transformation. Please now welcome Amit Das, the founder of Think360.ai. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about what it means to bring AI innovation to the large enterprises, medium-sized enterprises. And what I'm going to be talking about over the next 10, 15 minutes is this idea of why every organization should be thinking about this pivot to becoming an AI organization and what it means to break this big monolith called AI transformation into steps that focus on accelerating intelligent transformation, right? So we do not want to go too big, we do not want to go too small. We want to kind of figure out our way around becoming a very, very AI-centered organization. Now, one of the examples that really helps us contextualize, AI in real world is a driverless car. And before it happened, before we could see it running all around us on the streets, it seemed like a very, very distant reality. Now, if you open the hood a little bit on what these driverless cars are really doing as an AI application, is that they're harnessing tremendous volumes of data, images, videos, sensors, hardware, software, etc., and they're converting all of it into actionable insights in real time, right? So, do I need to brake? Do I need to accelerate? Do I need to take a right, left, whatever it is? And then they're converting that into these workflow actions. So the insights do get converted into software generated actions. The steering does something to move to the left or the right. But even while doing so, it is collecting an active feedback loop about, for example, when I brake, did the car behind me brake? When I accelerated, did I get too close to the car in front of me? And somewhere there you start seeing the power of these deep learning and kind of frameworks that a driverless car has running under the hood. All of this evolution with multiple layers of reinforcement learning is simplistically, for your and my experiences, is a driverless car. Now, stretching that logic a little bit, taking a leap of faith, what all of us really want is this idea of a driverless business, right? When the business is running on its own, and we are focusing on the core priorities that we have at that moment, launching new businesses, launching new products, focusing on the growth priorities, and so on and so forth. Just running the business by itself is kind of a driverless thing that we want on autopilot. And for that, this is kind of the big thematic thing that we always talk about. To do that, to achieve that driverless state, you need to make a pivot towards bringing AI as a design element to your business. Now, a lot of us think that AI is this big thing, this big shiny thing, is this big bang initiative that we need to commission and keep working at it, over the next 5 years, 3 years, something like that. But what we really want to posit here is that we need to break this idea of AI as a big bang into smaller pieces, which are gathering momentum as they get built. So your need to build that big outcome is broken down into several small outcomes. Each outcome is linking to the next one, and you're accelerating your progress as you go along. And that transformation is what needs to happen as against some of these very, very large monolithic conversations that we have. And one of the barriers to that conversation is uh, this idea of how do I imagine the end state? How do I imagine the future to be, right? Because if I take current state, my mind is very limited by what's possible in the current state. And we are almost scared of imagining that world where, a Star Trek or a Star Wars kind of a scenario where you press a button and you teleport to another place, right? But unless you can imagine a future for your organization, you can't work backwards toward building that organization. And as Alan Kay very famously put, the best way to predict the future is to invent it, right? You start inventing that future. And that's kind of at the core of this AI pivot that we're talking about. Now, what does it mean? So we always say that organizations should be investing in what I call the future now thinking. So can a bank become a branchless bank? Can a hospital become a virtual hospital? Can a retail uh, store which sells shirts and pants and skirts and blouses, can that become a clienteling virtual video driven experience with absolutely immersive journeys? What will the futuristic version of my business look like, right? So you start thinking about it from the future and you do not worry about the improbability of it. That's the first mental shift that you need to make, because improbable does not mean impossible, right? So you start doing the organization journey. What will my bank or my insurance company or my retail institution or my product company going to look like 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, 20 years from now? That's the organization you want. And that vision breaks down into, this design factors, the oomph, the X factor that you want to bring there in those experiences. What's futuristic about it? Then you break it into a plan. But the real meat about what I mean by this AI pivot and this intelligent accelerated transformation is how do I change the execution to a non-linear approach. So you accelerate the build by building to accelerate. Uh, and you start building components that have this innate ability to kind of gather momentum as they move around. And one of the ways to do it is to think about it in terms of what am I really accelerating here, right? And then when we think about that, when we start thinking about what is this future made up of? So there's this idea of accelerating data, right? Because when you talk to organizations, when you talk to your teams, you always feel that data, the core oil, the core juice, which powers this intelligent thinking, is the biggest barrier. So you start bringing the allied data assets together. You start thinking internal, external. You start thinking high velocity, low velocity, high variety, low variety. But you are essentially putting in investments in place which are suddenly starting to make sense of all of this data. And when you get to that state, you start building these micro use cases that accelerate your intelligence or your insight about the business. When you get to that state, you start running these small experiments. Now, the experiment is like the biggest failure point of almost all large transformation initiatives because you're afraid to experiment. But if you can design experiments which show you what the action is and what the result is, that's when you get to the next big problem, which is about the change part of it. Every time you design a new action, you are essentially creating a new set of possibilities, and your organization will have to adjust to it. So you need to give them time and space to adjust to it. When that happens, you'll again go back to the first point and I start collecting a little more data and a little more insight and a little more action, and you'll get to the point of change starting to happen. Now, all of this is not being done like a 2 year thing. It's essentially being done like multiple cycles of 30-day, 15-day, 2 month, 3 month kind of initiatives that are building, one on top of each other. And finally, if you can get to that point where actions are happening, where people are adapting to the actions, you start measuring and refining. This is the part which we're very, very uh, uh, kind of in popular AI parlance we refer to as the reinforcement learning thing part of it. So we start thinking about what does it mean to keep learning and keep changing and keep evolving these outcomes, and you start talking about accelerating transformation. And over a period of time, it almost feels like the spirals of learning are becoming shorter and shorter and shorter, and your transformation is becoming extremely rapid. Now, if I think in terms of examples, because so far I've been talking very, very design perspective, uh, several industry leaders are making these pivotal AI investments. So when you think about healthcare, people are talking about how medical imaging can lead to active disease management, active prognosis, active interventions well before and much faster than how things used to happen earlier. And the cycle times for detecting extremely complex cases of cancer, etc., are coming down gradually. When you think about smart energy grids, people are making investments to optimize energy consumptions, reduce wastage, really make a green impact on the world. In more traditional terms, you can think about how claim adjudication and payouts are becoming faster and faster every day in the insurance industry. Banks are moving to absolute and complete virtual presences without really affecting the user experiences. Fintechs are really focused on that problem. Recommendation engines, there's so much content out there, but a company like Netflix invests so much in that recommendation engine, which is making you binge more and more and more and more and more, and they're continuously trying to solve for those problems. But there's several examples how in businesses to protect their interest over a longer period of time are making these pivotal investments, as I call them. Now, how do we do it, right? On a typical day, this exercise in imagination of the future now kind of exercise. Jokes apart, I think if I were to be a bank in the 90s or early 2000 or early 2010s also, could I ask myself this question of what does it mean to onboard a customer without ever physically meeting them for a loan, for a deposit product, for an investment product? All of us have signed multiple pages of forms of different kinds in our lifetime. When we start thinking about that as a problem, we start thinking about why we can't do it, right? We can't do it because we don't know enough, because we don't have enough high quality information, or we do not have enough trust in the information. We do not know how to use the information as the proxies are getting generated. So I focus on the first problem. Okay, what can be a replacement of the physical form? Can we use images? Can we use videos? Can we use geotags? What else can we use? Now then we start saying, is any of this information sufficient? And this is where you hit the human bias. So we say that no, when I look at this problem or when I look at this document, I can identify fraud. Can you train the machine to identify that fraud? That same thing that you as a human are doing. Even as you do that, to drive that change, that action-oriented change, you need to decide whether you are comfortable taking that action, or do you want some kind of, boundaries around these actions that are being taken to kind of manage the cost of change. So you start designing workflows, you start designing cost of error kind of models to say, oh, this one seems to be an expensive mistake to make, so I will set a different threshold. These actions, the corresponding change, when you start writing them down as use cases, you start getting to the point of actual transformation. Now, practical part of it. So if you wanted to actually onboard a customer for a loan product, and this change started happening a couple of years back, is you could potentially, by taking 3-4 pictures over over an onboarding experience, you could really onboard the customer without having met them even once, because you would have an API orchestration layer which is able to accelerate data ingestion. You would have a computer vision, AI technologies, kind of helping you process all these images, extract the right kind of information, convert them into features, insights that underwriters use. So thereby you are accelerating the insight part of it. All of this can go into infrastructure investments which are able to process underwriting in real time. So suddenly you have 5 different workflows which you can handle without having human intervention. So you're kind of accelerating the action. And the more and more customers that go through it, you're kind of bringing multiple journeys. So you're trying to be flexible on that. So you start investing in low code designers or policy configurators or rule engines. And that's how you start bringing that, the change. Now, any of these need not be done overnight if you want, or any of these need not be done for 100% of the population overnight. But the moment you do that, your real proof comes into play. When you give somebody their dispersal in less than 2 minutes, they have that aha moment, and that's when you see the value of it. And you say, yes, I want more of it, right? That is accelerating transformation. And when you do that over and over again, you start figuring out more problems. Okay, can I move the entire branch away, not just a product? Can I move the agent interactions to video with authentication layers, with offering, immersive experiences led by augmented reality, etc., uh, and kind of work through this delivery of experiences for which I don't need to use physical infrastructure. A lot of us were forced into that situation last year when COVID happened. But a lot of the organization had started making those investments well before that moment came. And they are the ones that were a lot more resilient in weathering this change. And that's why, in kind of as a summary thing to say, we keep saying that, if you make that pivot today, cometh hell or high water, whatever be the risk that the market throws at you, you'll be a lot more prepared to achieve whatever is your potential future vision. And that's why we keep saying that, as you see that acceleration happening, you will start from assisted intelligence to augmented to artificial to fully accelerated intelligence. And that's kind of, some of the things that we want to talk about. Uh, but happy to take any, feedbacks, questions, ideas. You want to deep dive into any industry use cases, would love to feel free to reach out. Thank you.